American politics seems to be entering a schizoid moment. We have the radical left meme machine driving violence, instability, terrorism, and assassination. And meanwhile, the right's reaction has oftentimes delved into conspiracy theories and dead ends. And what we're going to do on today's podcast is try to sort through this moment. It's about digital politics, it's about ideology, it's about street violence. And we're going to guide you through it in a smart, sober, and responsible way so you avoid the pitfalls left and right. All that and more on this week's episode of Rufo and Lomez. It's been a big week with the launch of the podcast, and we're starting to already get some of the initial reviews in. My favorite, though, is from the left-wing Mother Jones magazine, which has deemed us the far right's favorite fellas. We're now the representatives of the thinking man's far right.
Oh.
And the podcast apparently has influence all the way up to Vice President J.D. Vance.
Yes, very
What do you
real.
make of this? Is this real? Do we disavow? Do we endorse? What do we do?
Yeah, that's interesting. Mother Jones, huh? And I presume this is Kiera Butler. Is that right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Kiera. Okay. Yeah, Kiera Butler has been writing articles like on this scene off and on for quite a while. So this is not a surprise. It's interesting. This is it's good, I guess. We have now the endorsement of Mother Jones. Did you take this article to be positive? Is this, in support of what we're doing here?
I think it's branding that is supposed to be negative, but as it is so often, it actually is positive.
Right.
We have where's Father Jones? Is he out of the picture? That was my big kind of meta question about this. But I think we run with it. I think the thinking man's far right is a great slogan and a great brand for the new pod.
Sure, I'm okay with that. We'll roll with that. I think that's good. I'm satisfied. What else is going on? Chris, do you know it's my birthday today? Do you see my balloon? In the background?
I didn't see. I saw the balloon. I thought maybe I didn't know what to think. It's your birthday. Happy birthday!
It's my birthday.
What number is this? Are you going to tell us?
Yeah, I can tell you. So I'm 43. I'm an old man. I feel old. I'm unk. Okay, it's official. But I was actually thinking about this. I'm like a young middle-aged man. So if I feel youthful because I'm in this new phase of life where it's just, you just have your life now. This is it. This is like the big beefy center of what constitutes an adult life, is like this age from, late 30s into your late 60s. The kids are still in the house. You're in the middle of your career. And I'm at the very early stage of that. So there's still a lot to look forward to. And it feels weirdly like a youthful moment. Whereas when I was 37, let's say, I had kids by then. But even then, I was at the tail end of the previous stage of life. So I felt in some weird sense older, I'd exhausted that previous stage of things. Does this make sense?
It makes total sense. And I think now is the best time. It's certainly the busiest time. I feel like I'm just pushing it to my maximum at every hour of the day. I have a sick baby, trying to cart the kids to school, trying to figure out, how to keep the household running. And it's the time to take ownership, take stock.
Yeah.
And I think it's don't have a midlife crisis, start a very popular right-wing podcast. Seems actually the best advice for any middling-aged man that is out there considering their next move.
Okay, look, this is kind of like a midlife crisis move, starting a podcast. What else are you buying the Porsche or something and having an affair? That's very 90s.
Yes.
Coded. I think millennials you reach this middle section of life and you start a podcast. So we're doing the meme. We're doing the meme. It's fine.
We're doing the
it's
meme.
Good. Okay.
We are the meme.
We are the meme. This is all fine. I mean, okay, look, I don't want to spend too much time on this point, but also people out there, it does feel like if you're whatever you're going to get like done in your life, I don't, maybe this is too reductive or something, but you kind of have to do it now. You know, you get this sense, it starts to creep in around like 40, like, you know, the kick in the ass. Like if you're going to go out and do the thing, you got to go do it like right now. So there's a certain amount of like energy and excitement in this period, but also you're exhausted all the time. Kids are keeping you up at night. You can't get enough sleep. You know, exercise is hard to come by, et cetera, but we're doing it and it's great.
Yeah. No, it is great. Yeah. And I feel it, man. My oldest is in high school. He just started high school this year. And so I'm kind of thinking simultaneously, I actually feel pretty young. I feel like I'm just, you know, getting started. And then my kid is in high school. This is just unbelievable. But
yeah, that's weird.
Here's the big story for me this week. And I wrote a piece about it. And it's a topic I want to discuss and I really want to get your take on. I talked about the rise of American schizopolitics, looking at it on the left, looking at it on the right. And the basic thesis of this piece was that the left's memeplex, meaning the online discourse of the left that's, you know, spirals outward, creates violence. It generates violence. For example, the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Okay. But there's a phenomenon on the other side. The right's memeplex seems to generate paranoia and conspiracy. And the example, again, on the Charlie Kirk assassination, which was driven by the left-wing memeplex, the right-wing reaction, most notably from Candace Owens, is a kind of schizoid, paranoid, conspiratorial interpretation where she's gone to like, who was involved? Was it an inside job? What were the Israeli cell phone signals doing? Who was the man in the bushes? And let's roll the clip to give you a kind of a gentle taste of this. And then let's get your refreshing and insightful take.
And one of you guys caught this. You probably didn't even see it there. And we can get in a little closer. Do you guys have it slow it down, or do you guys just want to circle here? Okay. Right there. Right there. An individual standing there. Again, I am just amazed at internet sleuths.
Okay. I mean, gosh, there's so many places to go here. I think like one thing just with that clip, what I'm seeing is this this new paradigm we're in where politics is just everything. Politics consumes culture. And when politics becomes culture, it makes both things like deranged and makes all the participants sort of go insane. And we need to like create a better bifurcation between culture and politics. Like we need to go back to an old way of thinking about politics where politics is kind of boring and isn't like a true crime like podcast, which is sort of what you're seeing there. Okay, but now let's zoom out. Okay, like you know, Professor Time, you know, Richard Hofstadter, he wrote about this thing he called the paranoid style in American politics. This is back in the 60s. He kind of invents the idea of conspiracy theories. He didn't use that term when he wrote this piece for Harper's, but he talks about this paranoid style, the way certain kind of conspiracism tends to sort of creep into American political discourse. And the thing about that article, you know, he goes after the Birchers and everything, who of course, you know, were accusing everybody of being communist, which was basically true, except they took it just like a touch too far. They started accusing like Eisenhower of being a communist too, which, you know, that's probably not quite right. However, he did identify this conspiratorial style as being sort of distinctly a right-wing phenomenon. And I think that's basically wrong. It's not distinctly a right-wing phenomenon. What it is, though, is a phenomenon that tends to capture whatever side is out of power. Okay, so you don't have control of the sort of apparatuses that produce knowledge, these sort of epistemic authorities. You don't know where sort of, or how even, consensus reality gets made. And so you start to kind of spin up these ideas, these answers to questions that can fill the gaps. In other words, like, how does it come to be that the consensus among smart people, for example, like going back to COVID, is everybody has to wear a mask, everybody has to get vaxxed, and we all got to go through the shutdown? Like, how did we construct a reality where that just becomes the default view? I think people, because of COVID in particular, but it also is like a woke phenomenon, We can also just like talk about postmodernism as general, sort of creeping into the culture. This reality, this grounded reality, consensus reality has been largely upended. They don't trust it anymore, and for good reason. Okay, they've understood that consensus reality was built on a lot of sort of falsehoods and misdirection and a lot of coercion, sort of rhetorical coercion. And so now people are trying to like build back something in its place. I should say some people are trying to build back something in its place. I think people like Candace Owens, for example, who I don't know or anything, are just kind of adrift in this sea. They're untethered from everything. They're totally unmoored from any understanding of like how we produce actual knowledge, how we would construct a theory, for example, of who killed Charlie Kirk. Okay, so we're just seeing like the effects, really, of the total failure of the sort of liberal establishment, the cathedral, to use a term from our friend Curtis Yarvin, to help us understand what is real and what's not real.
Yeah, I think that's partially right, and maybe I'll kind of take some issue at the end, but I have noticed this phenomenon. You and I both grew up in Northern California. I'm sure you've seen this. A lot of the kind of paranoid narratives that came out of the 1960s, 1970s, left-wing counterculture. I lived in Berkeley for a couple years. You saw this at the time. You know, it was fear of corporations that were, poisoning the water. The anti-vax was very much a left-wing thing for many years. Marin County, like Vashon Island, Washington, all of the anti-vax hubs were very left-wing. And then just this general feeling of skepticism, fear, paranoia regarding large institutions. And you see all of that has now flipped, where the MAGA movement is led by an actual Kennedy, which has a lot of the same, and frankly, a lot of the stuff that I liked back then about, going to the Berkeley Bowl grocery store and, eating like a hippie, all those things I really enjoyed. And so now it's like, wait a minute, I can have all that and now be right wing. This is, look, on balance, probably a good thing. But I think that the question here in particular is important because someone like Candace Owens is just leading people astray. And many people on the right are scared to say that. They're scared to call it out. They're scared to plainly state the facts. But the narrative, the official story, which I think the evidence that's been assembled and released by the FBI is persuasive, is that a kind of left-wing kid that was radicalized on the internet, that was dating a transgender furry, murdered Charlie Kirk because he was an effective spokesman for the right. That's enough. I mean, is the true narrative, which I accept, gives us a basis for action, gives us clarity. Obviously, it's a terrible thing that happened. But when you're saying, actually, no, maybe it was the Israeli cell phone signals, maybe it was the 5G network, maybe the gun was over here, and look at the guy standing in the corner, the man in the bushes. That actually is extremely destructive. And if it were a fringe phenomenon, we could dismiss it out of hand. But Candace has, something like in the top 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 podcasts in the country. And so I think ultimately we have to have not just kind of epistemic freedom, but we also have to have epistemic discipline. Okay. Meaning we have to have some sort of sorting function on the right where we can guide people in a fruitful and productive direction, a direction that can yield political outcomes. Whereas if we have people spinning off into kind of schizoid land, it's ultimately not good for those people. It's not good for our country.
I agree it's not good, but the thing, maybe where the disagreement is here is like, whether this is an indictment on like Candace Owens or it's an indictment on the rest of the right, it's an indictment on serious people on the right to produce narratives, to produce media, to produce content that can capture an audience and lead them to a better place, to help them better understand what is and isn't true. It's like I sort of have a hard time getting upset with Candace Owens or anyone else putting forward like these sort of esoteric or bizarre, theories or whatever. It's like, fine, this is not unusual. This is kind of like what the media ecosystem has always entailed. And there's always been people, like the JFK assassination. Okay. So you have the Warren Commission, and then there's the official narrative. And then there's, people speculating for decades about whether or not it was actually true and who was responsible and was it this, set of people or that set of people. And it's like, okay, we can actually accommodate all of these different ideas and audience. Okay, so one thing I guess I wonder here is, are we in some new situation because of the internet and because of like this sort of algorithmic herding that happens?
Yes.
Algorithmic herding, by the way, this is like a financial term, but it works here. It's like, okay, you have these algos on social media, you respond to a certain kind of content, and then the algo just keeps feeding you this content. I don't even think it's malicious. It is feeding you the thing that stimulates you. It's feeding you the thing that keeps your attention. And what's keeping people's attention are these like conspiracy theories, are these wild ideas. And so, okay, so is it Candace Owens is like, does she have some responsibility to do something else? I don't know. I actually kind of don't think so. Maybe, but not really. Is there a responsibility for the rest of conservative or right-wing media or for, more sober analysis to emerge somewhere? Yes, there is.
Yes.
And that's the responsibility of, people who care about these things and have the kind of resources to create content that can better serve the audience. So there's that, but then there's also this thing where, yes, people are engaging in this online, but I think it's a real mistake to observe the total number of people watching Candace Owens videos and thinking that's the amount of people who actually believes the things she's saying. I don't want this to sound like Cope, where there's like a total denial that this has infected the populace at large, because I think both of us have had interactions with real people where like, a hairdresser is like, hey, what do you think about, whatever bizarre conspiracy? And you're like, yeah, totally, man. It's out there, but it's also a kind of pseudo belief in the sense that people are better at holding two things in their head at the same time than I think we give them credit for. Like you can hold the position that, Charlie Kirk was assassinated by this psychotic leftist and still at the same time entertain as a kind of like pastime, as a kind of intellectual hobby, a media hobby, a news hobby, that the UFOs came down and, he was killed by the lizard people or whatever.
Of course, that's true. Look, I give people kind of wide latitude in their folk beliefs, their superstitions, their kind of media hobbies. Okay, fine. And yes, most people who believe in these conspiracy theories, if you actually look at the mechanics of their life, they're able to navigate life successfully. And so that tells you that at the core, they can distinguish between reality and pseudo-reality. I'll give you an example. I had an arborist, actually very nice guy, very dedicated arborist, a love of nature, a love of trees, has taught me a lot. And when he figured out I was in politics, he pulled me aside and he said, hey, Chris, I'm part of Q.
Nice.
And it's like, tell me about this. Because again, I'm not going to condemn. I think it's fine. Tell me about the beliefs. And he had gone, all the way down, right? Down some dark rabbit holes that I had not even been aware of previously. And okay, fine, cool. This is your like hobby. This is your belief. And on one hand, you say, hey, I'm not persuaded by any of this. Okay, just to make that clear. However, he still runs a company. He still supports a family. He still employs a bunch of guys that go out there and climb trees with him. And so, yes, on the one hand, you could look at the numbers for the Candace Owens podcast and say, well, this isn't just like, you can have a schizoid narrative. It doesn't mean that the people who believe it have a schizoid personality. That's true. But I would say, and you equivocated on this, but I would say, yes, at some level, Candace Owens does have a responsibility to do something better if she can. That's the question. What is motivating this? Who knows? Are we going to feel outraged about this? No. Like, okay, not going to feel outraged.
Wait, do you think Candace can be, I mean this sincerely, like, do you think Candace could be a more productive spokesperson for like good ideas and a positive agenda?
I think, at this point, probably, yeah. In the past, I think she was. People really got excited about what she was doing. People, but my read about this is that a lot of people that are in politics, in the discourse, are not motivated by ideas. They're motivated by personalities. They're motivated by spectacle. They're motivated by incentive ladders. And so my read on a lot of this stuff is that the incentives did meaningfully shift with the internet. They did meaningfully shift with kind of the liberalization of the online sphere, where it was kind of this free-for-all environment. And I think that's good. Don't get me wrong. I think that is a net positive, but it comes with these downsides where there's no effective means for people to sort through ideas. And look, who's ultimately at fault? I think the establishment is ultimately at fault.
Yes.
Because in a post-COVID environment where the government, the nonprofits, the tech companies were engaged in false and malicious kind of conspiracy theories, or denying so-called conspiracy theories that turned out to be true, and then using suppression, using censorship to squash discourse on the right, they generated such extreme distrust that obliterated the system they were trying to create. Thankfully, it was a terrible system. But now we're left with this kind of difficult place where we, on the right, we kind of don't know how to navigate it. And you have the conspiracy theorists, conspiracists, racialists, kind of, members of the kind of podcast land that are generating an audience and following the incentives. They're chasing the algorithm wherever it goes. And then you have on the other side some, I think, well-intentioned, smart, talented, rigorous people who are creating intellectual products that nobody wants to buy. And so this is the perennial white paper problem. And look, like, how do you divide the blame? At a certain point, it doesn't really matter. But what I think matters is figuring out what are our principles for navigation. How do we navigate? How do we talk? How do we think? How do we guide others? And I think that's really where the need is for someone to relay a sense of how to navigate this environment, how to navigate through this chaotic discourse that we see. And then for those of us also to maintain our cool, to say, all right, you know, a certain amount of people will never be dissuaded from believing that, you know, the moon landing was fake. And at the end of the day, that's fine. I'm not really too bothered by it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. So maybe I'm just being disagreeable today, but you know, the thing here, I think
it's your birthday. You have the right.
Yeah. Okay. The thing here is, I think like everybody is approaching this more or less with the same intentions. Maybe there are some bad actors. There are certainly bad actors out there. Okay. But like, I want to trust that people are saying, look, I want to know what is true. I'm going to tell my audience what I think is true to the best of my ability. And you have like, here's the quintessential sort of example of where our kind of epistemic grounding got so badly shaken up over the last 10 years. Like Alex Jones would go on the air and he'd declare with like a literal tinfoil hat on that they're turning the frogs gay.
Shocked by it, so I'm up here bashing it because I don't like gay people. I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay. Do you understand that? Serious crap.
And then like all the smart, serious people would sort of laugh at Alex Jones for saying that they're turning the frogs gay. Well, guess what? They're actually, they were turning the frogs
are gay now.
Okay.
All the frogs
they
are
were putting
gay.
atrazine or whatever the chemical was in you know, the food supply. And the frogs were actually turning gay. Okay. And like, so he was right. And now everybody's going, well, if they were turning the frogs gay, what else were they doing? And so, okay, we're going to sit here and we're going to try to tell our audience as best we can what we think is true based on a fair and sober evaluation of the evidence in front of us. And like, there's going to be some other people around who are taking a slightly different position on these different questions. Some of them are going to be way outside what we think is like reasonable. And over time, we will, through this sort of pastiche, through this collage of different voices and different perspectives, somehow start to settle on what is and isn't true. I mean, maybe this is like, maybe I'm being just like the ultimate free speech lib here, but this is the point of free and open discourse. You have all of these people saying what they think is true, or maybe even not. Maybe they are lying. Maybe they're being manipulative and steering their audience down the garden path for their own sort of malicious purposes. Nonetheless, this big sort of stew of noise is what ultimately produces some amount of truth, at least in the long term. I think in the short term, it produces a lot of schizophrenia too, and that's the thing we're sort of dealing with is like this window where we haven't quite shaken out who is and isn't reliable. Okay, that's my word on this.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth to that. The frogs are gay. That is confirmed.
It's confirmed.
And even actually to tie it into our previous thought, I actually visited the headquarters of the John Birch Society last month.
Nice.
As part of a reporting project. I was driving through town. I'd learned that they're in Appleton, Wisconsin. And so I visited the office. And they had pulled some files for me because I was interested in this fluoridation of the water question.
Yeah.
The John Birch Society was saying that fluoridation of the water, this was back in the 1950s, that it was harmful to health. It didn't offer the dental benefits as promised. It was part of a kind of communist plot to soften the American people, to make them more susceptible to communist infiltration. And like many things with the John Birch Society, maybe there was a grain of truth that they took too far. But it is kind of interesting that actually now RFK Jr., leader of the MAGA movement, current HHS secretary, has essentially published as official government policy that fluoridation in the water is more harmful than helpful, and they're issuing recommendations to remove it. And in fact, many cities have done so in the past decades. And so, again, I don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a chemist. It's not an interest scientifically for me, but it's an interest politically, and it's an interest as a matter of discourse that, maybe, again, with exaggerations about, communists, poisoning the water with fluoride to have an infiltration. But over the large arc of things, I think you can say that it was good that they made the argument. It was good that smart people rebutted it in a certain manner. And it's good that there is a sober scientific evaluation of the evidence and let it take us wherever it may. The answer is certainly not censorship, as we saw during COVID. Like, obviously not. The lab leak was a racist conspiracy theory. Oh, whoops! It's the Occam's razor, most obvious reason for the virus's origins. And so, I think. Yes, let the opinions proliferate, have some tolerance for kind of schizoid narratives, and also keep in mind, this is really important, and it brings us full circle on the piece. Ultimately, Candace Owens' conspiracy theories about the man in the bushes who may have been involved in the alternative narrative is less harmful to society than the left's Memeplex, which ended up with a bullet through Charlie Kirk's neck. And so if the options are conspiracy theory versus violence, I think any moral person can say we have to have a sense of balance, a sense of proportion, and recognize that the left-wing Memeplex leads inexorably towards violence, towards terrorism, towards intimidation, and therefore, while we should have an in-house criticism, we should never forget that the extreme problem that threatens our lives, our liberty, our property, is this left-wing terror Memeplex. Summarize, like, Reddit is more dangerous than Rumble. I think that is my basic conclusion.
The ultimate left-wing conspiracy theory was the thing we just went through for like the last 5 years, which was, there's this all-pervasive, ubiquitous, omnipresent force sort of dictating all of our social lives. It controls power. It is something that everybody is implicated in. And it's this thing called systemic white supremacy. And we're going to reshape our entire society around the conspiracy of systemic white supremacy, which, by the way, Chris, I don't know if you know this, you're participating in it, whether you even know it or not. Okay. Whether it's even intentional
I've been a leader
not.
of it. I mean, if you believe the New York Times,
right.
I'm like,
probably am
guy.
too. Okay.
Yeah.
So we just lived through a period of just completely psychotic ideological spasms where the left took this insane conspiracy theory, which is what it is. It has all of the features of any other kind of conspiracy theory, and tried to use that as the basis for reshaping our entire political and social life. Okay. And they actually had people in the highest positions of power to do that on their behalf. Okay. So you're right. Like there is a real asymmetry here, and we don't need to just dwell only on the various ways the right kind of misses or has some kind of bizarre habits of mind.
Yeah, that of course is true, and we all live through that. And the systemic racism conspiracy theory is amazing. And what really encapsulated it for me, there was a book or an article that I read now years ago that comes to mind called racism without racists. It's like this idea that nobody is really racist. There are no racists in positions of power. There's no deliberate racism. You can't measure it or find it. You can't, factor it out in some sort of social science equation, but we know it's there. We know it's the most important thing. We know it's everywhere. And it's like, you guys, you guys managed to make this sound sophisticated. You managed to brand it successfully, and you managed to turn it into policy everywhere. Yeah. Luckily, and I think this is something that we should keep in mind, and we'll end this on a hopeful note, is that this paranoid conspiracy, let's talk about, for example, Alex Jones. On the podcast charts, we're number 71 currently. Alex Jones is number 70. I think we're about to overtake him. Like, subscribe, hit the bell, leave a 5-star review on Apple, which the
for my birthday.
For Lomez's birthday.
Give me the gift here. Please hit the subscribe button, 5-star review. I would love nothing more than, to zoom our way
rise
up
in the charts
on Apple iTunes. That is really... That's the big cash out for, being on the right and in this midlife crisis we're going through.
Yes.
Okay. What's next on the agenda? Chris.
But let me kind of button that point. So, look, Alex Jones is there. He's an entertainment figure. You should take it as entertainment. He has the occasional truth. He has the occasional totally bonkers opinion. Should he be our intellectual lodestar? Should he be our guide through the thicket of social problems? Probably not. But am I going to get bent out of shape because he's out there? No. Would I oppose his censorship? 100%. And I think that the good thing about the right currently is that these ideas, unlike the left, where they attained policy level power, administrative power, people in positions of authority and responsibility on the right, for the most part, can kind of recognize and separate the reality from the spectacle. Yeah. So let's move on to the next story. This is a story that popped up on the timeline. It's about immigration, which was, of course, President Trump's #1 issue, now dating back 10 years. I mean, immigration is the central point. Yeah. But he had something very interesting where he seemed to be, if not reversing, at least modulating his position on H-1B visas, which are almost like temporary worker visas for, supposedly high-skilled workers in tech, in business, and in other fields. And so let's roll the clip and then give us your take.
Sure.
Does that mean the H-1B visa thing will not be a big priority for your administration? Because if you want to raise wages for American workers, you can't flood the country with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of foreign workers.
You also do have to bring in talent.
We have plenty of talented people here.
No, you don't.
We don't have talented people here?
No, you don't have certain talents, and people have to learn. You can't take people off an unemployment line and say, I'm going to put you into a factory where we're going to make missiles, or I'm going to put
How did we ever do it before?
You can't just say a country's coming in, going to invest $10 billion to build a plant, and going to take people off an unemployment line who haven't worked in 5 years, and they're going to start making missiles. It doesn't work that way.
This is my I'm not terribly happy about this kind of rhetoric face, but I'm going to try to be tactful here. The truth is, Trump has always been a little squishy on this issue. Even if you go back to before the election, there was an episode on the All In podcast where he was talking about sort of preserving H-1Bs. He was also talking about preserving foreign student visa.
Let me just tell you that it's so sad when we lose people from Harvard, MIT, from the greatest schools, and lesser schools that are phenomenal schools also. And what I wanted to do, and I would have done this, but then we had to solve the COVID problem. But what I want to do and what I will do is you graduate from a college, I think you should get automatically as part of your diploma a green card to be able to stay in this country. And that includes junior colleges too. Anybody graduates from a college, you go in there for 2 years or 4 years. If you graduate or you get a doctorate degree from a college, you should be able to stay in this country.
This was seen as a kind of compromise with the quote unquote tech right, the tech sort of, at least they say they're dependent on these H-1Bs to sort of continue the business model that they currently have, which is actually probably true, although it is not therefore incumbent on the United States people and on President Trump to allow them to continue these abusive practices with regards to H-1B. So while that might be their business model, it ought not to be their business model. And we may have to take some coercive action so that they change their business model. But I understand as like a political practical matter, I think this is like something he has kind of demonstrated some willingness to compromise on. Unfortunately, I'm not terribly happy with that. But I also think like people are taking this way out of proportion. It is a statement on a news show that is not necessarily reflected in what is actually happening from a policy point of view. And so every time like Trump says something, you have people kind of like losing their minds. This is the thing. Like we know from Trump that he talks out of sort of both sides of his mouth. He tells people at certain times one thing and then in another context will say a different thing. And this leaves him a lot of space for negotiation. And by this point, it sort of surprises me that people don't understand the way he speaks publicly is not always indicative of his policy prescriptions. Let me just say this, though, as like a matter. And then I'm curious because I know you have some stories about H-1Bs like and how they operate in big tech. We need to get rid of the program entirely. I think Mark Krikorian, the great Mark Krikorian from the Center of Immigration Studies, he's written at length about this. There are a number of ways to do this. The idea behind the H-1Bs as these workers that we cannot replace is true of maybe like 1.5% to 2% of these H-1Bs. And the way that you can construct a model for delineating between the ones we actually need versus the excess that can actually be replaced by American workers is by setting a very high floor on the salary that any company would have to pay to retain an H-1B worker. Right now, it's only about 2.5% that make over $150,000 a year. I believe I might have that number a little bit wrong. That may be the 250,000 number. In any case, that number should be a floor of $250,000. That would mean that it comes at an incredible cost to bring in, not an incredible, but a sizable cost to bring in an H-1B worker for these firms. And they're going to be much better off. They're going to be incentivized to find American workers who can do that work and then train up American workers as replacements.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I've seen it a little bit in my time in Seattle. I have a lot of friends in tech at the big companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google. And one thing I learned just walking the floor, you know, they have these large pits in these buildings, like a skyscraper in Bellevue, Washington, for one of the big tech companies. They have this open office floor plan. And I'll tell you a funny story. So I remember I went in with my wife who was working there at the time. And I go in, there's like hundreds of people sitting at these computers, and they're virtually all East Asian and South Asian, Chinese and Indian with maybe some Pakistanis, maybe some Koreans, but mostly Chinese and Indian, the whole floor virtually. One of my wife's colleagues comes up, gal from Pakistan. She says, "Oh, you look just like Mike. I've got to introduce you to Mike." It's like, all right, cool. Introduce me to Mike. And then she calls out the whole floor, "Hey, Mike." And totally unseen, it's like a critter popping up out of the ground. This white guy named Mike pops his head above the cubicles and then comes over and she's so excited. "You guys look exactly the same." and this guy Mike looks at me. I give him a look. We're like, we look nothing alike. You know, like all white guys look the same. I get it. But what was really interesting, I asked, later, said, hey, how much of this floor is like H-1B, is temporary labor or special status labor? And it was a large percentage of people. And I asked, well, what do they actually do? And it was junior programmers. They were doing debugging. They were doing, support tickets. They were doing whatever. And one of the other things that I learned is that the wage level for a lot of these H-1Bs, predominantly from India, they were at a 50 to 70% discount relative to native-born American workers doing the same jobs. And they were locked into the company because of the visa status. They couldn't job hop. They couldn't get competitive offers. And so you have essentially a system
indentured
of
servitude.
It's an insourcing rather than an outsourcing. That you can suppress the wages, that you can have essentially cheap labor that is a form of indentured servitude. We don't want to be too, it's a metaphor. It's not exactly the same thing, obviously. But okay. it really, you can always go back to India, but they're making a multiple on what they would make in India. And they're making a fraction of what the companies are paying a fraction of what they would pay to domestic labor. And so it's like, this program has to be scrapped. This is not the right thing to do. And I think the idea of a higher floor is a good one, because then companies would really have to select that top tier talent. And look, the United States should bring in top tier talent from all over the world. But we have to admit that, you see the H-1B logs, it's like the manager at a 7-Eleven. Is not exactly bringing Werner Braun in.
No, it's like, a total scam. It's a total scam. And like, I'm actually, I'm like in search of the good argument for why we need to be importing hundreds of thousands of H-1Bs every year. I frankly don't.
The argument is really easy. It's that tech companies want it, and tech companies want to get.
But tough.
Want to get a payout from Trump. That's
sorry, tough. Like, okay, you're an American company, and you get all of the benefits of being an American company. You have this robust legal system, this is the thing that gets lost in all these conversations, actually kind of drives me crazy, is like all of these subtle benefits that you get by working with Americans and being in an American company. There are these unspoken norms of doing business, these expectations that you can come into business relationships with about fairness, about sort of being lawful, about how you negotiate deals. You have all this robust infrastructure around your company. You have
lack of corruption, which is endemic almost everywhere else.
You have so you have like the entirety, really, in some sense, of like Western civilization that your company rests on top of and exists because of, like, this capitalist system. Like these neoliberals, like the Cato Institute people or whoever, just think that this all just exists in some kind of like abstract vacuum, this hypothetical vacuum. No, all of this stuff rests on this long history that we've produced through a lot of struggle and strife and resources that have been put to bear on building out this infrastructure that allows these companies to be efficiently run. In return for having this ballast on top of which you have this productive firm, you have some responsibility to hire the people who've allowed this to exist in the first place. And by the way, in the long term, it is better for you. It is going to be better for you to have a productive native workforce. And so any tech people out there who are listening to this, do not lose sight of the fact of what the long-term horizon looks like if you abandon a native workforce. People are not going to put up with this for more than a single, maybe even just a half a generation. The people are going to get restless, and you're not going to like what that looks like on the other side. That is a threat.
And look,
by the
Americans
way.
are extremely talented. If you look at the history of Silicon Valley, Americans from all over the country, a lot of Americans from the Midwest, they migrated to this place. They had creativity. They loved the craft. They built these incredible companies. I remember even I have a friendship with one of the guys who invented email. the guy who invented Outlook,
Nice.
the first
Yeah.
mass commercial email program. And it's like, just like a young kid sold a company to Microsoft at a young age, worked his way up and built this incredible thing. And this friend describes that the initial culture at the time, it was just people who were passionate about building, passionate about engineering, passionate about technology. And I think what you get as these companies turn into these global companies that then homogenize culturally, and they seek only to operate through the balance sheet by reducing labor costs, you get something that also perverts the initial spirit that drove the technological boom in the first place. And we should be honest about it. The capitalist system, it rests on the Anglo-American foundation.
Yes.
And look, I'm half Anglo, I'm half Italian. The Italian side of me is it may be sad about this, maybe resentful about this, maybe feel some inferiority about it. But my mother's side, the Anglo side, is responsible. And I can tell this from all my relatives in Italy. There's not a capitalist or entrepreneurial bone anywhere in their body. God bless them. They can cook, they recite poetry, they're beautiful people. But what we have here is unique. And I think degrading it with just this impulse towards minimizing labor costs, importing cheap labor, exploiting that labor, is also unnecessary. Look at the profit margins of these big tech companies. It's not like they're commodity firms that have to compete on a 1% marginal basis. I think it's so short-sighted, and I think the national interest overrides the particular economic interests of these firms. I'd like to see Trump eliminate H-1B and expand something like the O3 program, the more genius level program.
Right.
And I think the Lomez floor is the right proposal.
So the other thing too, it's not just this. I mean, I agree with all that. Okay, I don't know that we're going to find so much disagreement on this point. But the other thing here, what you're talking about, is this kind of like Anglo culture, these sort of like unspoken norms and sort of intuitions and values and aspirations and how you think about what makes a satisfying and ambitious life. This is what got Vivek in so much trouble back in December when this issue came up. If you remember during the H-1B debate, for anybody who wasn't around or heard that, Vivek Ramaswamy, who otherwise has sort of like spoken, the right kinds of ways about certain topics in this, general domain, made the point on Twitter, the really bad point, I want to say, that there is something wrong with American culture. And that, we're too busy like playing football and watching Saved by the Bell and, aspiring
and celebrating
to
the
be,
homecoming queen.
We want to aspire to be Zach Morris. God forbid we want to aspire to be Zach Morris, when instead we need to be practicing for the spelling bee. And like, we need to be going to like math camp when we're like 6 years old. And it's like, no, man, that is not this culture. If you want that, you can go back. You can go find that somewhere else. That is not... By the way, that does not produce more capable human capital. It just doesn't. It teaches you how to like operate within a very constrained sort of bureaucracy. It might teach you some level of like intellectual discipline or something, but it is completely anathema to the kind of creative, impulsive, risk-taking that is what makes sort of Anglo-capitalism so great. No, we actually want people playing football. We want people learning how to stick their head running full speed, like inside of a scrum, and risking personal injury. That is the real skill. And that is like the special sauce that makes America and Americanism so great. And so we just this is such a mistake. Well, I'm going to
draw the line at like traumatic brain injury, but I take your point at least in metaphor.
There has to be a real risk, though. I mean, I'm serious about this. Like, I get it. Okay, I don't want my kids to get brain injuries either. But by the way, playing high school football, you're not going to get brain injuries. You have to actually risk something. If it's just a false kind of risk, if it's like I didn't play soccer, okay, I'm sure that some soccer players are good people. Some, I assume, are good people. Okay, but no, you have to go play football. You have to stick your head somewhere where you could get a serious injury.
Did you play high school
football? It doesn't
football?
count. Of course I did. I played high school football. I was a very good high school football player, actually. This was
What
all
did you play?
revealed.
What was
this
your-
was
what
all
was your
revealed in
position?
my docs article. I was a cornerback, and I was like an H-back wide receiver. I returned punts, and you know, I would get like jet
fast.
sweeps.
Yeah.
I was very fast. Okay, I was
Good.
a white chocolate. They call me white chocolate. What can
Dude,
I
and
say?
now you're middle-aged and you have a podcast. Your life
that's
has
right. I'm living the
collapsed.
living
you,
the dream,
you peaked
man.
so early.
Oh man.
No,
Don't even
I
get me
agree, and
started.
I agree. And here's where I agree. I was like a music kid in high school, and so I was friends with all the athletes. You know, dated some of the cheerleaders. But I was a music kid, creative, politics, etc. But what Vivek says, he says we need no sleepovers. We need to not go to the mall as teenagers, and we don't need to watch Saturday morning cartoons, and we don't need to celebrate the homecoming queen. I was like, dude, what are you talking about? That's America. Like, love it or hate it, like that is our national identity. Those are unique American forms. Those are like global exports even. And what he's talking about is something that I saw when I lived in China. It's an Asiatic or Eastern model. It's the Mandarin model, meaning like the kind of, it's like a eunuch model, frankly. It's a way of careful study, cold discipline, pushing out desire, and maximizing your ability to take the test. Because in China and in other places in the East, the test is determinative of your entire life. You're not really valued as an individual who makes autonomous decisions. And in fact, when I was in China, I learned something amazing. You take the national exam for a kind of high school age, and then you're not only assigned which university to go to by the Chinese Communist Party, you're assigned a major. Like, so you're optimizing your whole life towards this narrow test taking. This is like an IQ thing too. I think why you have Asians with slightly higher mean IQs, we're not going to get in trouble with this. This is my own opinion, totally speculative, but maybe interesting, is because the culture itself is a test taking culture. I'm a kind of persuaded by Nassim Taleb's argument about IQ. You can go read it elsewhere. But I think that they're optimized towards test taking, towards this careful and constrained rationality. And so very good engineers, very good administrators, very competent kind of memorizers of a lot of information, very good at the spelling bee, right? The spelling bee winner is always now South Asian in the United States.
Pretty much.
But lacks something else that the Anglo-American civilization has. And that's not to say that it's universal, right? There are good American test takers. There are good Asian entrepreneurs. I'm talking about general cultural trends. So let's get to the last story before we do an amazing feature. Real briefly, let's talk about another proposal floated by the Trump administration, and in my view, a mistaken proposal, the 50-year mortgage.
Oh, boy.
Another form of debt slavery, in my view. But, you know, do you have a 50-year mortgage? Should we go 100 years? What's your thoughts?
Look, man, again, I think there's some grasping at straws here. I'm not going to defend a 50-year mortgage, okay? Like, that is not a great idea. It doesn't actually, okay, look, maybe there's like, I shouldn't even say it actually. I don't even want to defend this a little bit. I'm not even going to try to defend this. It's a pointless proposal. Let's just say that. I don't even want to say it's bad. It's just pointless. It like doesn't solve any problem that it's ostensibly trying to solve. We have basically in this country, you know, we should get into this on our next episode. We're going to talk about, let's have an episode where we talk about things that the Trump admin needs to do to kind of like get things back on the rails in terms of domestic policy, because there's a couple of things happening right now in terms of orientation and focus that are distracting from the core problems facing the country. Obviously, immigration is one, like this broader question of who we are. But then this other thing is we have this basic asymmetry in terms of how our politics and policies benefit the old versus the young. Obviously, that's like a very crude sort of categorization. There's this big middle ground. What do we mean by the old? Of course, any civilization worth living in is going to take care of its elderly. I feel that very strongly. And like, I think a lot of the boomer hate, while perhaps deserved, also loses sight of the fact that it's actually great that we have a society that can like take care of its old people. And
these are also literally our parents. you're a millennial, these are our parents.
I love my parents. I want them to have good older lives. I want them to be able to like indulge themselves and, you know, be able to go on vacations and drink nice wine and all that kind of stuff. So I don't.
My parents are at the
them for
Grand
that.
Canyon right now.
It's
just
great.
living
It's
life.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay, but still, there's this really distorted asymmetry with how like wealth sort of moves in our culture, and all the wealth moves uphill, actually, from young to old. And I think this is partly the problem of boomer politics. They are such an outsized political force.
Yes.
And they are so narrowly focused, as is everyone else, on their self-interest that they've lost sight of the larger picture of what they're trying to leave behind for the generations that come after. And so, you know, one example of this is that the average first-time home buyer is now 40 years old. 40 years old. This is up from 33 as of 2020. Okay, so it's really accelerating. The average home buyer, that means anybody who buys a home, even people on their second, third, et cetera, is 59. That's very old.
That's crazy.
And what we're seeing is, whether it's intentional or not, I don't think it's intentional, the outcome of these various policies and how we think about who can buy a home and property tax rates and how we architect certain incentives, both the sticks and carrots, have basically crowded young people out of home buying. And this is a massive, massive structural failure on our part. This has massive downstream effects in terms of like fertility rates and everything, and marriage and all the stuff that makes life good. You know, that the housing piece of it is a proxy for all of that. But it's a very important piece of that, and we need to fix this problem. It's both a supply problem and a demand problem. We're going to have to figure out some solution that's better than just going to debt peonage for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I think, look, if we're talking about the American script, the life script that the country offers to young people, it is sleepovers, the football team, homecoming, you go to college, get a job, and then get that, you know, pink house with the white picket fence.
Yep.
Look, that is good. That's very normie. That's very bourgeois. That's very middle class. But like, that actually is an amazing thing. It's an amazing path for most people, and it should be widely available. It's not, which is a huge problem. The 50-year mortgage, the theory behind the policy is pretty simple. It's saying, let's do anything we can to get monthly payments lower. And so if you spread out the payments over a longer time horizon, you will reduce the monthly payments on the median house by something like a couple $100 a month. But what you're doing is you're making it so that housing is then a speculative financial asset because people aren't going to stay and pay off a 50-year loan, and that you're pushing the payment on the principal back, 10 years, 15 years, 20, 25 years. So for the first decade, you're really not paying down any principal at all. That's pure money to the bank. And you're also, this makes it even worse. For the individual, I think it's a bad deal, terrible deal. But for society, it's bad because it will then, if it works, according to the theory, it will artificially inflate demand even further, which drives up housing prices. The real problem is this, and then we're going to get to our last segment. The real problem is that we've flooded the country with currency. We've flooded the country by printing dollars, especially after COVID, where all of that money that is floating around the system has gone to these assets like housing.
Yeah.
In my town, the prices have almost doubled since 2020. I live in a small town. It's nothing special. It should be like Mayberry, an all-American place. And it is unaffordable. Tract homes in an average middle-class neighborhood are now more than $1 million. This should be like a red flag. 50-year mortgages, I think probably good intentions, but not a good solution. So let's wrap up with a feature that you suggested.
Yeah.
If people like it, it could be a recurring feature.
Let's see.
And this, we're going to do some psychoanalysis here. I think you're an optimistic, creative, ebullient guy, but you have a touch of masochism. And you have a habit of
Let's go.
listening to NPR. You have a habit of scrolling through Blue Sky.
Yes.
You really keep tabs on the libs. And I want to know, is it masochism? Is it curiosity? Is it,
all right.
What is
Look,
it? And what are the libs up to this week?
I listen to NPR every morning. The only podcast I listen to except for Night Owls and Conundrum Cluster, are like libtard podcasts, what I affectionately call libtard podcasts, like all the New York Times podcasts. Okay, and the theory behind this is I am like curious. I know what I believe. I understand my own beliefs. I understand why I believe the things I believe. I don't always understand why other people believe the things they believe. And I want to understand. I think this is actually important. There's like real political value in knowing what the opposition believes. And actually let me say this too. For a long time, the right has had an advantage because we know what the left believes, but the left didn't know what we believed.
Yes.
Every institution is filled with like this default liberalism. So no matter where you are and who you are, you're constantly inundated with like the messaging of the left, whereas the left never heard the right's beliefs. And so they're always like grasping and trying to figure it out on the fly. And this creates tactical advantages for us. We're losing that tactical advantage because liberal media is obviously ebbing. Like there's this, it doesn't have the same cultural power it once had. And then like on Twitter, they've all left. They've all gone to blue sky. Okay, so now my proposal here is that maybe every once in a while, maybe we do this once a month, we're going to do this segment called What the Libs Are Doing This Week. Okay, what are the libs talking about this week? We can maybe have
What are they talking about?
So the libs this week are talking about the shutdown. This is the big story in lib world. The libs are angry that their moderate faction has capitulated on shutdowns. So Fetterman, Schumer, Masto, some of the independents, they have signaled that they're going to vote. It might be happening today, actually, to reopen the government. And, we had this multi-week shutdown. The Dems felt like the sort of the consensus opinion was and is we were winning. This was good for us. Look how well we did in the elections. Public polling is demonstrating that even though usually the party in charge is not blamed for the shutdown, in this case, the Republicans are being blamed for the shutdown, not us. So this is good PR. It's good tactically, and we should just continue doing this. And the kind of like pretense for this is they want to drag out these ACA subsidies. They want guarantees for these ACA subsidies going forward. Really what this is, though, is just like a power grab. They want to see how far they can push it.
Sure.
So just a couple of anchor points here. Ezra Klein is on record as saying, okay, yeah, we should because he wants to be like he wants to ingratiate himself to the left. So he's saying like we definitely should continue with the shutdowns. We shouldn't do this. But it's like bad for our constituents because they're like losing SNAP benefits. So actually like we should open the government. He's being very wishy-washy. So that's the consensus middle position. Jon Stewart, the consensus sort of like media opinion is this is terrible. We should never agree to shutdowns. We need to like keep fighting. All the like progressives on Blue Sky are threatening sort of like mutiny, which happens, weekly. They want a complete severing from the Democratic Party. They failed them. The Democratic Party is cucking, okay, according to the progressives. So that's kind of the lay of the land on the left. Does this matter? The left is so inept. They're kind of out to sea right now. So this is like something for them to hold on to. I don't know how important it is in the long run, though, but there it is.
Yeah, well, I'll make the case actually for that position. I think that, look, the election results in Virginia, for example, which has tons of federal workers, could that have been influenced by the shutdown? Yeah. Are Republicans who are, historically the party of fiscal restraint and have historically had, kind of been the cause of more shutdowns, is there a tendency to blame Republicans more than to blame liberals rather than an in power, out of power? I think probably yes.
Yeah.
And so, look, I think maybe at the margins, their argument in this case is actually right. I guess I agree with Blue Sky. However, I think the intensity is really wrong.
Yeah.
I think, look, on the right, and I think among the general public, the shutdown was almost unnoticed unless you were a federal employee that was furloughed or laid off or unpaid. And so I think the salience of these things has totally changed. I remember those shutdowns in the 90s and the 2000s. It felt like huge, right? It felt like these are massive headlines. There's huge political pressure. It's the topic of discussion, top of mind for all the policy wonks and Sunday shows. The media environment has changed so much. And I think people have tuned out of these kind of policy fights, especially fiscal policy fights. They don't hit like they used to. And so I think the blue sky people are grasping. And ultimately, did the illegals get the free health care? That was the fighting point, right?
I don't.
What's
do
going
they
on with
even
that?
care? I kind of like wonder if they even care. I mean, they say they care.
Is that
they
real?
say that's the thing that matters. I don't think they actually care. I think this just is a test of power, like a test of what they can get away with. Josh Barrow, for example, here's another like sort of middle, centrist touch point is like, look, the Democrats basically won. They're winning. It makes sense for them to take their chips off the table and just walk away with this like modest victory. I think that's like. That makes sense to me. That's like a fine narrative. I mean, because you're right. The risk for them is they leave the shutdown in place and people just get used to the idea that they don't need this massive bureaucracy.
And their life is actually completely
fine. Like fine. And it's like, all right, we figure out a way to pay the TSA agents. We figure out a way to like identify who is essential and who's not. Yeah. And then we have this radically sort of attenuated government that actually works perfectly. So,
that's been my position this whole time. It's like, wait a minute. We shut down the government. We identify what's actually essential. We pay for that. And then we just keep the rest of the government shut down forever. Yeah. I just feel like, we could have a radically smaller federal bureaucracy. This is one of my big disappointments, which we're going to get into in the next episode. This is one of my big disappointments with Doge. They were doing great. Hey, we're shutting down USAID. We're gutting the Department of Education. We're gutting, X, Y, and Z grant programs. Like, keep going. This is fantastic. I don't sense a real big political cost, but there was an economic cost to Elon. So this is great. And this is why we are called the thinking man's far right. It's our sterling insights. We're keeping tabs on Blue Sky. And that is why everyone is now liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell on Apple Podcasts. Is that not?
And don't forget happy birthday to me, please.
And say happy birthday to our friend Lomez in the comments. He has a podcast. Everything is fine. There's going to be no psychological meltdowns.
I couldn't ask for anything more.